I'll marry him. The words did not rise, they landed, clean and deliberate, in the center of the cathedral. For a moment, no one reacted. Then the silence tightened. The kind that comes when people realize something has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Nina Carter stood a few steps from the altar, exactly where she did not belong. She wasn't dressed for attention, and she wasn't meant to be seen. Yet now every eye in the room was fixed on her. Measuring, questioning, recalculating. Adrian Volkov turned his head slowly toward her. His expression did not change, but his attention sharpened. "This isn't a joke," he said, his tone even controlled. "You don't step into something like this without understanding what it costs." Nina met his gaze without hesitation. "I'm not joking." A faint murmur moved through the pews, quickly suppressed. The guests weren't reacting emotionally. They were adjusting. People like this didn't get shocked, they assessed. Vanessa Hale let out a quiet laugh, one that carried more edge than amusement. "You can't be serious," she said, looking Nina up and down as if confirming what she already believed. "You're standing here offering to marry a man I just walked away from?" Nina didn't look away. "You didn't walk away," she replied. "You made a show of it." The response was calm, but it shifted the balance. Vanessa's smile held, though it tightened slightly at the corners. "That's bold," she said, "especially from someone who works in his house." "I know where I work," Nina answered. "And I know what you're doing." The room quieted further. A few guests leaned back, others leaned in, but no one interrupted. They were waiting to see who would control the moment. Adrian stepped closer, just enough to make the space between them deliberate. "You don't understand the position you're putting yourself in," he said. "This isn't a gesture you take back later. I'm not planning to take it back." There was no urgency in her voice, no attempt to convince. That, more than anything, held attention. She wasn't reacting, she had decided. Vanessa exhaled softly, impatience beginning to surface. "Let's be clear," she said, her tone sharpening. "You're stepping in because you think this makes you important. It doesn't. It just makes you convenient." Nina glanced at her briefly, then back at Adrian. "If that were true, you wouldn't still be talking." A few heads turned at that. Not because it was loud, but because it was precise. Vanessa didn't respond immediately this time, and the delay was noticeable. Adrian watched Nina closely, as if testing whether there was hesitation hidden beneath her composure. "Why?" he asked after a moment. "Why involve yourself in something that doesn't concern you?" The question was direct, stripped of tone. "Because it does," Nina said. "Not just to me." "That's not an answer." "It is," she replied just as evenly. "You're being dismantled in front of people who benefit from it, and no one here is going to stop it." "I'm not interested in watching that happen." The statement settled into the room. It didn't accuse anyone directly, but it didn't need to. The implication was clear, and several people shifted in their seats, subtle but visible. Vanessa folded her arms lightly, her expression cooling. "You're overestimating your role," she said. "This doesn't change anything. He's still the same man I just refused." "Then there's no reason for you to be concerned," Nina answered. That response didn't raise her voice, but it landed with weight. Vanessa's expression flickered brief, controlled, but enough. Adrian took a measured breath, then spoke again, his voice lower. "You're making a promise you don't fully understand," he said. "You said you wouldn't betray me. That's not something you say lightly in a room like this." "I didn't say it lightly. And if you're wrong, I'm not." There was no emphasis, no force behind it, just certainty. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, not awkward, but deliberate, as if both understood that whatever came next would define everything after. Vanessa broke it first. A short, dismissive laugh returning. "This is unnecessary," she said. "If he wants to salvage what's left of his image, there are better ways than this." Adrian didn't look at her. "You've said enough." It wasn't raised, but it ended the exchange. The priest, who had remained still through most of the confrontation, finally shifted his stance. "Mr. Volkov," he said carefully, "this situation is highly irregular. We may need to pause." "Continue," Adrian said. The word came without hesitation. The priest hesitated only briefly before falling silent again. No one argued. No one stepped forward. The decision had already been made. Adrian extended his hand toward Nina. The gesture was simple, almost understated, but it carried finality. He wasn't asking. He was acknowledging. Nina looked at his hand for a brief moment, then placed hers in it. Her grip was steady, her posture unchanged. Around them, the room adjusted once more. Not with surprise now, but with recognition. The situation had shifted beyond speculation. This was no longer disruption, it was replacement. Vanessa stepped back, her expression no longer amused. "You're making a mistake," she said. Adrian's response came without looking at her. That decision was already made. The meaning was clear enough that no one needed clarification. The cathedral settled into a new kind of quiet. One that felt less like shock and more like acceptance of something inevitable. Conversations would come later. Reactions would follow. But in that moment, the structure had already changed. Adrian leaned slightly toward Nina, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "This is your last chance to step away." Nina didn't look at him immediately. Her gaze moved briefly across the room, the guests, the aisle, the doors that still stood open. Then she answered, calm and certain, "I'm not stepping away." He held her gaze for a second longer, as if confirming it, then straightened. The ceremony did not pause after Nina took Adrian's hand. It shifted, recalibrated, and continued with a precision that made the disruption feel almost intentional. Adrian spoke briefly with the priest, his tone low but decisive, and within minutes the quiet machinery behind him began to move. One of his men stepped forward, murmuring instructions into a phone, and another approached Nina with a measured respect that had not been there before. "We need to prepare you," he said, not asking, already guiding her away from the altar, toward a private room behind the nave where the air felt different, removed from the weight of the audience still waiting outside. Inside, the room was simple but functional, clearly used for bridal preparations earlier that morning. A dress hung near the wall, untouched now, abandoned along with the woman who had refused to wear it. Nina glanced at it once, then looked back at the man who had followed her in. He didn't gesture toward that dress. Instead, he spoke into his phone again, sharper this time. "Bring the other one, now." There was no explanation, but there didn't need to be. Within minutes, 2 women arrived carrying a garment bag that looked too carefully handled to be ordinary. When they unzipped it, the difference was immediate. The dress they revealed was not decorative in the way expensive things often tried to be. It was precise, structured, cut to draw attention without asking for it. Ivory silk that caught the light in a controlled sheen. A fitted bodice that held its shape without excess. And a long, clean line that extended downward with quiet authority. It wasn't soft. It was composed. The kind of dress that didn't rely on tradition to justify itself. Nina hesitated for half a second, not from doubt, but from the recognition that nothing about this moment was accidental anymore. One of the women met her eyes briefly and said, "We don't have much time." Her voice calm. Practiced. As if she had done this before under different circumstances. Nina nodded once and stepped forward. The transformation was efficient. No unnecessary commentary, no dramatics, just movement with purpose. Fabric adjusted, seams aligned, hair released from its tight hold and restyled into something simpler but more defined. Nina didn't speak much during it. She watched in the mirror, not admiring, not questioning, just observing the change as it happened. The woman looking back at her was still her, but the frame had shifted. The role had caught up with the decision. When they finished, one of the women stepped back slightly, assessing her work with a quiet nod. "That will hold," she said, more to herself than to Nina. Outside, the cathedral had not emptied. People had remained, drawn by the uncertainty, unwilling to leave before seeing how it concluded. Conversations had started now, low and controlled, but present. The moment Nina re-entered the main aisle, those conversations stopped. The reaction was not immediate noise. It was something sharper. People turned, then held. A man near the front exhaled softly, not realizing he had done it out loud. A woman in the second row leaned forward slightly, her earlier composure replaced with something closer to surprise. Even those who had dismissed Nina minutes ago now looked at her differently, not because she had changed, but because the presentation had aligned with the decision she had already made. Adrian stood where she had left him, his posture unchanged, His attention fixed the moment she stepped back into view. He didn't speak right away. He looked at her, taking in the details without exaggeration, without performance. Then he gave the smallest nod, almost to himself. "That works," he said, his tone measured but unmistakably approving. After a brief pause, he added, "You look exactly how you should." It wasn't flattery. It was acknowledgement. Nina walked toward him, aware of the space opening around her without anyone consciously stepping aside. The room had adjusted again, and this time it wasn't resisting. It was observing. Vanessa, still near the front, turned slowly as Nina approached, her earlier confidence tempered but not gone. Her gaze moved over the dress, the posture, the composure, and for the first time she didn't immediately respond. When she did, her voice was quieter, edged with something less certain. "So this is the replacement," she said, though the word no longer carried the same weight. Nina didn't stop. "No," she replied calmly. "This is the continuation." And just like that, a single sentence changed everything. "If you've made it this far, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Wherever you're watching this, leave a comment and tell me, if you were in Nina's place, would you have done the same? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story." That answer settled in the room differently. Not confrontational, not defensive, just final. The priest, who had remained waiting, visibly recalibrated himself as Nina took her place beside Adrian again. He adjusted the book in his hands, cleared his throat lightly, and began where he had left off, his voice steadier now, as if the structure of the ceremony had finally caught up with what was happening. Adrian reached for Nina's hand again, this time without hesitation. His grip was firm, grounding, and deliberate enough that those watching understood this was no longer reactive. It was chosen. As the ceremony resumed, the atmosphere shifted from uncertainty to something more defined. The guests were no longer waiting for disruption. They were witnessing an outcome. Whatever judgment they carried would come later. For now, the room had settled into acceptance, not because it agreed, but because it recognized the authority behind the decision. When the vows were spoken, they were not embellished. No extended declarations. No attempt to reshape the narrative into something sentimental. The words were simple, direct, aligned with the tone that had carried them through the moment. At the final exchange, the priest paused slightly before concluding, as if acknowledging the unusual path that had led them here, then finished the ceremony without further hesitation. The reaction this time was different. Not applause, not celebration, but something closer to acknowledgement. A few heads nodded. A few people turned away, already preparing to leave. Others remained seated, watching as Adrian and Nina stood together, no longer a disruption, no longer a question. As they turned to walk down the aisle, Adrian glanced at her briefly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You handled that well." Nina met his gaze for a second, then looked ahead again. "I said I would." He didn't respond immediately, but the slight shift in his expression suggested he had registered more than just the words. Behind them, the cathedral began to empty. But the impact of what had happened remained, carried quietly by every person who walked out those doors, already shaping the story that would follow them into the city. By the time the last guest stepped out of the cathedral, the story had already begun to take shape beyond those doors. People did not linger to congratulate. They left in controlled silence, each carrying a version that would be retold over dinner tables, behind office doors, and across quiet phone calls that started with, "You won't believe what just happened." Inside, the space felt larger now, emptied of its audience, leaving only the aftermath flowers still arranged for a different bride, candles still burning as if nothing had changed. And at the center of it, Adrian and Nina standing in a moment that had moved too fast for reflection. Adrian did not rush to leave. He spoke briefly with Michael near the front, his tone low, precise, issuing instructions that were already being executed before he finished speaking. Nina stood a few steps away, no longer part of the staff line, not yet settled into anything else. The dress still felt new on her, not uncomfortable, but unfamiliar in the way responsibility often was. She watched the last of the guests disappear through the doors, noticing how none of them looked back. "They'll talk," Adrian said as he returned to her side. "They already are," Nina replied. He gave a slight nod, acknowledging the obvious without concern. "Good. Let them decide what they think this is." It buys us time. Nina glanced at him. Time for what? For them to realize it wasn't a mistake. The answer was direct. But it carried weight. Not defensive, not reactive, strategic. She understood then that whatever had happened in that cathedral, he had already moved beyond it. This wasn't about recovering from damage. It was about controlling what came next. Michael approached them, his expression composed but sharper than before. "The press is already outside," he said. "Not many yet, but enough." Adrian didn't hesitate. "We don't avoid them." Nina looked at him briefly, then back toward the doors. "You want them to see this?" "I want them to see exactly what they expect to see," he said. "Nothing more, nothing less." "And what do they expect?" Adrian met her eyes, a faint edge of something unreadable passing through his expression. Stability. The word settled between them, simple but intentional. They stepped outside together, and the shift was immediate. The quiet control of the cathedral gave way to the sharp attention of cameras, voices calling out questions that overlapped before any one of them could fully form. It wasn't chaos, but it wasn't controlled either. Not yet. "Mr. Volkov, is it true your fiancée left you at the altar?" one voice called out. "Who is she?" Another followed quickly. "Were you already involved before today?" Nina felt the attention turn toward her, sharper, more curious. She didn't look away. She didn't step back. Instead, she stayed where she was, close enough to Adrian that there was no confusion about her place beside him. Adrian didn't answer immediately. He let the question settle, let the noise peak just enough to make the silence that followed feel deliberate. Then he spoke, his voice calm, steady, carrying without effort. "My wife and I have nothing to clarify," he said. The situation resolved itself. The phrasing was intentional, not denial, not explanation, closure. A few more questions came, but they lacked the same force. The tone had shifted. The narrative, at least for now, had been defined. As they moved toward the car, Nina became aware of how naturally the space opened around him, how people adjusted without being told. This wasn't new for him. It was routine. What was new was her place within it. Once inside, the door closed and the noise disappeared instantly, replaced by a controlled quiet that felt almost unreal after the intensity outside. The car moved before either of them spoke. Nina exhaled slowly, not out of relief, but to settle herself. "You didn't deny anything. There's nothing to deny. You didn't explain anything either." "Explanations create doubt," he said. "Certainty ends questions." She considered that, then nodded slightly. It wasn't her way of thinking, but it made sense within his world. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the city moving past them in reflections and passing light. Eventually, Nina spoke again. "What happens now?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be considering the question, not because he didn't know, but because he was deciding how much to say. "Now we wait," he said. "They'll test this, quietly at first, then more directly." "They?" "People who benefit from me looking unstable." Nina leaned back slightly, absorbing that. "And this marriage changes that?" "It complicates it," he said, "which is enough for now." She turned her head, looking at him more carefully. "You planned for something like this." A brief pause followed. "I planned for the possibility that today wouldn't go as expected," he said. "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." The honesty was measured, but it was there. Nina let that settle, then shifted slightly, her tone quieter. "You told me this would cost me." "It will. I believe you." That seemed to hold his attention more than anything she had said so far. He looked at her for a moment, as if reassessing again. Most people wouldn't. Most people wouldn't have said yes. A faint shift passed through his expression, something close to acknowledgement. "No," he said. "They wouldn't." The car slowed as it approached the building again, the same controlled entrance, the same seamless transition from public to private. When they stepped inside, the atmosphere felt unchanged, but Nina understood now that it wasn't. Everything around her was the same. She wasn't. As they entered the elevator, Adrian spoke again, his tone quieter, more direct. "There's something you need to understand before this goes any further." Nina looked at him. "Go ahead." "This isn't a situation where hesitation works in your favor," he said. "If you're uncertain about anything, you don't show it. Not outside. Not where it can be used." And inside? That depends on whether it matters. The doors opened, and they stepped into the apartment, the city stretching out beyond the glass in long, quiet lines. The silence inside felt different now, not empty, but waiting. Nina walked a few steps in, then stopped, turning back toward him. "And if I disagree with you?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. He set his jacket aside, then looked at her with the same steady focus he had carried all day. "Then you choose when it's worth it," he said. The answer wasn't dismissive. It was practical. Nina held his gaze for a second, then nodded once. Fair enough. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the day settled into the space between them. Not overwhelming, but present. Then Adrian said, more quietly than before, "You changed the outcome today." Nina didn't respond right away. She looked out at the city, at the lights beginning to fill the evening, then back at him. "So did you," she said. A brief silence followed, not unresolved, but understood. Whatever had begun in that cathedral was no longer contained there. It had moved beyond it, into something neither of them could fully control, only manage, and both of them knew, without needing to say it, that this was the point where it became real. By the time the evening settled over the city, the story had spread far beyond the cathedral. It moved the way stories always did, in circles, like his quiet at first, then sharper, then everywhere at once. Nina saw it the moment she picked up her phone. Notifications stacked faster than she could read them, messages from numbers she barely recognized, headlines already forming versions of what had happened. She didn't open them right away. She already knew the shape they would take. In the living room, Adrian stood near the window, phone in hand, speaking in a low, controlled voice that carried none of the urgency she expected, but all of the authority she had begun to understand. He wasn't reacting. He was adjusting. The conversation ended quickly, and he set the phone aside as if nothing on the other end had required effort. "They've started," Nina said, lifting her phone slightly. "They were always going to," he replied without turning. "The only question is how they frame it." "And do you care?" He looked at her then, just briefly. "Only enough to make sure it works in our favor." Nina nodded, not agreeing, but accepting the logic. She moved toward the kitchen, more out of instinct than need, pouring herself a glass of water just to have something steady in her hands. The apartment was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It felt observed, even without anyone present. "You weren't surprised today," she said after a moment. Adrian leaned one shoulder lightly against the window frame. "No. You expected her to walk away." "I expected something that would force a decision," he said. "She chose her version of it, and you already had a plan." "I always do." Nina turned slightly, studying him more carefully now. "And I wasn't part of it." "No," he said, straightforward. "You weren't." There was no apology in that, no attempt to soften it, just the truth. She let that settle, then took a small breath. "Then we should probably talk about what I am part of now." That shifted his attention fully. "Go on," he said. Nina set the glass down. "This isn't just about what happened in the cathedral. You said people are going to test this. That means they're going to test me too." "They will, and I need to know how far that goes." Adrian watched her for a second, then nodded once. "Fair." He moved away from the window, crossing the room with a quiet, controlled pace that made the space feel smaller again. "You'll be questioned," he said, "not directly at first. People will approach you under the assumption that you don't understand what you've stepped into. They'll test your reactions, your consistency. And if I fail, they won't tell you," he said. "They'll adjust their strategy." Nina let out a quiet breath, not surprised, just confirming what she had already assumed. "And your people? They'll watch," he said. "Some of them will accept you because I do, others won't. That won't change quickly, so I don't try to win them over." "No," Adrian said. "You don't try at all. You stay consistent. That matters more." The advice wasn't comforting, but it was clear. Nina leaned back slightly against the counter. "And what about you? What about me?" "You said this wasn't protection," she said, "but you're still responsible for what happens around me now. That's how people will see it." Adrian's expression shifted just slightly, not enough to read fully, but enough to register the weight of the question. "I don't let things happen around me without control," he said. That's not the same as answering the question. A brief pause followed. Then he said, No, it isn't. The honesty was quiet, but it landed. Nina nodded once. That's all I needed. Silence returned for a moment, but it wasn't empty. It felt like a space where something had been clarified, not resolved, but understood. Adrian picked up his phone again, glancing at it before speaking. There's a dinner tomorrow, he said. Small. People who matter. Nina looked at him. And I'm going. Yes. That's quick. It needs to be, he replied. The longer we wait, the more they assume there's something to question. She considered that, then gave a slight nod. Then I need to know who they are. I'll send you the details tonight. And what version of this are we presenting? Adrian's gaze held hers. The one where none of this was uncertain. Nina let out a small breath, almost a quiet laugh. That's a clean version. It's the only one that works. She didn't argue. She understood that much now. Her phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. She glanced at the screen and saw a name she hadn't expected. Lena. The call repeated, then stopped, then started again. Nina hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. Nina, where are you? Lena's voice came through immediately, sharp with concern. I'm fine, Nina said, keeping her tone steady. That's not what I asked, Lena replied. I just watched a video of you getting married in the middle of someone else's wedding. You don't get to say I'm fine and leave it at that. Nina glanced briefly at Adrian, who had stepped back just enough to give her space without leaving the conversation entirely. I know, she said. I'll explain, just not right now. A pause followed, then Lena's voice softened slightly. Are you safe? Nina considered the question more carefully this time. Yes, she said finally. Another pause, longer this time. That sounded like you had to think about it. I didn't, Nina replied. I just chose the answer. Lena exhaled slowly. That's not reassuring. It's honest. Silence lingered for a second before Lena spoke again. I'm coming to see you. No, Nina said immediately. Not tonight. Nina, I need one night, she said, her tone firm but not sharp. Just one. Another pause. Then, reluctantly, fine. One night. Then you tell me everything. I will. The call ended, and Nina set the phone down, aware of Adrian's attention on her again. Someone important? He asked. She knows me well enough to ask the right questions, Nina said. And you didn't answer them? Not yet. Adrian nodded slightly, as if that aligned with his expectations. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city outside had fully shifted into night now, lights stretching in long lines beneath them. Steady and indifferent. Nina moved back toward the window, stopping a few feet away from him, not too close, not distant either. You said this would cost me, she said quietly. It will, he replied. She looked out at the city for a second, then back at him. Then I want it to mean something. Adrian studied her, not interrupting, not dismissing, just listening. I didn't step into this to play a role, she continued. If I'm here fully. That means I need to understand what I'm standing next to. A brief silence followed. Then Adrian said, You will. It wasn't a promise in the usual sense. It was something more measured, more conditional, but still deliberate. Nina nodded once. That was enough for now. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware of the lines being drawn above it. Inside, the distance between them remained, but it had changed shape. Not smaller, not resolved, but defined. And for the first time since the cathedral, the reality of what they had started settled in completely, not as shock, not as uncertainty, but as something that would demand more from both of them than either had planned. The next morning did not arrive quietly. It arrived with a rhythm already in motion, as if the world Nina had stepped into did not allow for pauses. She woke earlier than she intended, the unfamiliar room still holding the faint weight of the previous night, the city outside already alive beneath a pale morning sky. For a moment, she stayed still, not disoriented, but aware that nothing about this space belonged to her past. Then she sat up, steadying herself before the day could move faster than she was ready for. Her phone was already lit with messages, but she ignored them for now. Instead, she focused on what she could control. She dressed simply at first, something neutral, something that didn't try to define her before she understood the room she was walking into. When she stepped out into the main area, the apartment was already awake in a different way. The smell of coffee lingered, and the quiet efficiency of movement suggested she was not alone. Adrian was at the table, reviewing something on his laptop, his posture relaxed but focused. He looked up briefly as she entered, not surprised, as if he had expected her to be awake early. "You're up," he said. "I didn't expect to sleep much longer," Nina replied, walking toward the kitchen. She poured herself a cup of coffee, letting the routine ground her before turning back toward him. "You've been up for a while." "I don't sleep late," he said simply. That fit. Nothing about him suggested hesitation or delay. She sat across from him, not formally, but deliberately. "You said there's a dinner tonight." "Yes. And you're expecting me to walk in like this is normal." "That's exactly what I expect." Nina took a sip of coffee, then set the cup down. "Then I need to know what I'm walking into." Adrian closed his laptop, giving her his full attention now. "5 people," he said. "3 of them sit on the internal board that reviews my decisions. 1 manages external partnerships. The last one doesn't hold a title, but his opinion carries weight. And they're all questioning you. They're all waiting for a reason to," he corrected. Nina nodded slowly. "And I'm part of that equation now." "You are? Then they're not just meeting me," she said. "They're evaluating whether I weaken you." Adrian's expression shifted slightly, not in disagreement, but in acknowledgement. "That's one way they'll see it. And the other? That you reinforce the image they need to trust." She leaned back slightly, considering that. "So, I'm either a liability or a solution." Yes, the clarity helped. It always did. Nina stood, moving toward the counter as she thought through it. "Then I don't try to impress them," she said. "I don't try to prove anything." "No," Adrian said. "You don't." "I stay consistent." "Yes." She nodded once. "That I can do." A brief silence followed, but it wasn't uncertain. It was functional. Later that afternoon, preparations moved quickly. A dress was brought in, different from the one the day before, less ceremonial but just as precise in its intent. Darker, more structured, designed to project control rather than attention. Nina didn't question it. She understood now that nothing presented in this world was accidental. When she was ready, she stepped into the main room again. Adrian was already there, adjusting his cufflinks, his movements controlled and unhurried. He looked at her, taking in the details without exaggeration, then gave a small nod. "That works." Nina allowed herself a brief exhale. "You're not big on compliments." "I don't use them when they're unnecessary." That almost sounded like one. "It was," he said simply. The honesty was direct, and for some reason, it landed better than anything else could have. They left together, the transition from private to public smoother this time, though the weight of it hadn't lessened. Outside, the city moved with its usual rhythm, unaware of how much was shifting beneath its surface. The car ride was quiet, not tense, just focused. When they arrived, the restaurant was already prepared for them. It wasn't overly crowded, but the people who were there noticed, not openly, not in a way that drew attention, but in small, controlled glances that acknowledged presence without interruption. They were led to a private table near the back. The 5 people Adrian had mentioned were already seated. They didn't stand immediately. They observed first. Adrian greeted them with a measured nod, then gestured slightly toward Nina. "My wife," he said. The introduction was simple, but it carried weight. Nina met their eyes one by one, not lingering too long, not avoiding contact either. "Good evening," she said, her tone calm, grounded. One of the men, older, gray-haired, leaned back slightly. "That's a development," he said. "It is," Adrian replied. Another, sharper in tone, added, "Unexpected." "Only if you weren't paying attention," Adrian said. A faint shift passed through the group. Not disagreement, but recognition that the conversation would not be led in the direction they initially intended. Dinner began without formal acknowledgement of the tension, but it remained present, threaded through every question, every pause. Nina spoke when necessary. Not more, not less. She didn't rush to fill silence, and she didn't retreat from it either. At one point, the woman at the table, Eleanor, if Nina remembered correctly, looked directly at her. "You handled yourself well yesterday," she said. Not many would have. Nina met her gaze. Most people weren't in a position to. That's one way to see it. It's the accurate one. A brief pause followed. Then Eleanor gave a slight nod. Fair. That was enough. The rest of the evening continued in that measured way, each exchange carrying more meaning than the words themselves. By the time they stood to leave, nothing had been openly challenged, but nothing had been fully accepted either. In the car on the way back, Nina let out a quiet breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That wasn't easy. It wasn't meant to be, Adrian said. She glanced at him, but it worked. He looked at her, just briefly, then nodded. Yes, he said. It did. Nina leaned back slightly, looking out at the city lights passing by. The day had been controlled, deliberate, and far from over. But for the first time since stepping into this, she felt something settle, not comfort, not certainty, but alignment. She wasn't reacting anymore. She was part of it, and that changed everything. The drive back from dinner was quieter than the one that had taken them there, not because there was nothing left to say, but because both of them understood that what had happened at that table would take time to unfold. The city moved past in long stretches of light and shadow, and for a while Nina let herself sit in that silence, replaying details, not searching for mistakes but measuring reactions. She had learned long ago that people rarely revealed themselves in what they said first. It was always in what they chose not to say. They didn't push as hard as I expected, she said finally. They didn't need to, Adrian replied. They saw enough. Nina turned slightly toward him. And what did they see? That you're not easily shaken, he said. That you don't overcompensate. That matters. And what didn't they see? Adrian's expression remained steady. Whether that consistency holds under pressure. Nina let that settle, then nodded. So that's next. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. When they arrived back at the building, the lobby felt more aware than it had the day before. Not overtly. Not in a way that drew attention, but in the way the receptionist's posture straightened slightly, in the way a man near the elevators paused just a fraction longer than necessary before stepping aside. The story had moved faster than the people, but it had reached them all the same. Inside the apartment, the quiet returned, but it didn't feel the same as before. It felt layered now, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of everything being set into motion. Nina slipped off her shoes, setting them neatly by the door before walking further in. Adrian didn't go to the window this time. He stayed near the center of the room, loosening his cuffs with a controlled motion that suggested he wasn't done with the day yet. They'll talk to each other tonight, he said. Compare impressions. Decide how to proceed, and you'll hear about it. I already have, he said. That didn't surprise her. Nina moved toward the kitchen, pouring another glass of water more out of habit than need. And nothing changes yet, he said. That's the point. She leaned lightly against the counter. You're waiting for someone to make a move. Yes. And when they do? Adrian looked at her then, his gaze direct. Then we see what they're willing to risk. The phrasing wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. The implication was clear. Nina took a small sip of water, then set the glass down. You trust them? No, he said simply. Any of them? No. That answer came just as easily. Nina let out a quiet breath. That's a long way to run a system. It's the only way that works, he replied. She studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. Then I need to understand something else. He didn't interrupt. You said earlier that I would be tested, she continued. But you didn't say how far that goes. Tonight was controlled. Predictable. That won't last. Adrian's expression shifted just enough to acknowledge the point. No, he said. It won't. So what happens when it isn't controlled? She asked. A brief pause followed. Then he said, you rely on judgment. That's not specific. It's not meant to be, he said. Specific rules get people hurt. Nina absorbed that, not fully satisfied, but understanding the reasoning. And you? She asked. What do you rely on? His gaze held hers for a second longer than before. Experience. That's not something I have here. No, he agreed. It isn't. The honesty landed without resistance. Nina pushed off the counter, walking a few steps toward the window, looking out at the city again. The lights were steady, unchanged, indifferent to everything happening above them. Then I'll have to learn quickly. You will, Adrian said. There was no doubt in his voice. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nina turned back. There's something else. He waited. You said I would inherit your enemies, she said. I need to know who that includes. Adrian didn't answer immediately. He moved toward the table, picking up his phone before setting it down again, as if deciding not to use it. Not all of them have names you can use, he said. That's not helpful. It's accurate, he replied. Some of them operate through people you'll never see. Others will approach directly. You won't always know which is which. Nina considered that. And the ones I can see? They're the easier ones, he said. They want something you can identify. And the others? They want leverage. The words settled between them. Nina felt the weight of it, not as fear, but as clarity. And I'm that leverage now. Yes. Again, no hesitation. She nodded once. Then I need to know where your lines are. Adrian looked at her more carefully now. What do you mean? What you protect, she said. What you don't compromise. Because if I don't know that, I can't predict how you'll respond. A brief silence followed, longer this time. Then he said, I don't compromise control. That's not the same as protection. No, he agreed. It isn't. Nina held his gaze. Then answered the question. For the first time since she had known him, Adrian took a moment longer to respond, not because he didn't understand, but because he was deciding how much to give. Finally, he said, I protect what becomes part of my structure. Nina didn't look away. And I'm part of that now. Yes, the confirmation was quiet, but it carried weight. She let that settle, then nodded. Good. That's what I needed. The conversation shifted after that, not ending, but easing into something less defined. Adrian moved back toward his phone, checking messages that had accumulated, while Nina remained by the window, her reflection faint against the glass. Minutes passed before she spoke again, her tone more neutral. There's something I noticed tonight. He glanced up briefly. What? Eleanor, she said. She wasn't just observing. She was waiting. For what? For a mistake, Nina replied. Not mine, yours. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his attention sharpened. And she didn't get one, Nina said. But she will keep looking. A faint shift passed through his gaze, something close to acknowledgement. She always does. Nina turned slightly, facing him again. Then she's not your biggest problem. No, he said. She isn't. The agreement came easily. The room fell quiet again, but this time it felt more settled, as if something had been established between them that hadn't been there before. Not trust, not fully, but alignment. Nina picked up her phone again, glancing at the screen before setting it back down without opening anything. They're going to escalate, she said. Yes, and we let them. For now. She nodded once. Then we stay ahead of it. Adrian watched her for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That's the idea. Nina leaned back slightly, crossing her arms loosely as she looked out at the city one more time. The night had settled fully now, steady and quiet, but beneath it, she could feel the shift continuing, moving outward in ways neither of them could fully track. This wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about anticipating, and for the first time since the cathedral, Nina understood exactly where she stood, not on the edge of something uncertain, but inside it, where every choice mattered, and every mistake would be remembered. The shift didn't happen loudly. It never did. It began the next afternoon, in the space between routine and expectation, where small disruptions carried more weight than open confrontation. Nina noticed it first in the way the apartment staff moved, not disobedient, not disrespectful, but more careful, as if every action was being measured against something unspoken. It wasn't fear, it was adjustment. And adjustment, she had learned, usually meant pressure was building somewhere just out of view. Adrian was in his office when the call came through the main line. Not his personal phone. Not one of the direct channels he used for business. That alone made Nina pause. She was in the living room, reviewing the files he had sent her the night before, committing names and patterns to memory when the sound cut through the quiet. One of the staff members hesitated before answering, their voice lower than usual, more cautious. Mr. Volkov is not available, the man said. There was a pause. Then something in his expression changed. Not fear, but recognition. He glanced toward the office door, then back at Nina. uncertain for a fraction of a second, before speaking again. "I understand. I'll inform him." When he hung up, the silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. "Who was it?" Nina asked, her tone even. The man hesitated, then said, "He didn't give a name." That was answer enough. Nina stood, closing the file in front of her. "Tell him anyway." The man nodded quickly and moved toward the office. A few seconds later, Adrian stepped out. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. "What did he say?" he asked. The staff member repeated the message, word for word. He said, "Tell him the situation has changed. He'll understand." Adrian's expression didn't shift, but something behind it did. A recalculation, fast and precise. "And nothing else?" he asked. "No, sir." Adrian nodded once. "That's fine." But it wasn't. Nina could see it in the way his attention moved, not outward, but inward, narrowing, focusing. "That wasn't random," she said. "No?" Adrian replied. "It wasn't." She stepped closer, not intruding, but present. "Someone wants you to know they're moving." "Yes. And they used a channel that isn't yours." "That was intentional." Nina crossed her arms loosely, thinking through it. "So they're not trying to hide. They're trying to signal." Adrian glanced at her, a brief acknowledgement of the accuracy. "Exactly. Then why not be direct?" "Because this isn't about communication," he said. "It's about positioning." The distinction mattered. Nina exhaled slowly. "They want you to react." "Yes. And you won't." "No." The answer was immediate, but not dismissive. It was strategy. A moment passed before Nina spoke again. "Then we need to know who benefits from forcing that reaction." Adrian didn't answer right away. He walked toward the window, his posture unchanged, but his focus sharper than before. "More than one person," he said, "but only one would do it this way." Nina studied him. "Someone who knows your patterns." "Yes." "And expects you to follow them." "Yes." That narrowed it. Nina walked a few steps closer, stopping just behind him. "Then the message isn't for you," she said. "It's for the people watching you." Adrian turned slightly, looking at her now with a different kind of attention. "Go on. If you react, they confirm what they already think," Nina continued. "That you're unstable, that this marriage was a mistake, that you're compensating. And if I don't, they escalate," she said, "because silence only works if it creates doubt. Right now, it doesn't." The room settled around that realization. Adrian held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once. "That's correct." Nina let out a quiet breath. "Then this isn't the move. It's the warning." "Yes. And the next one won't be subtle." "No." That answer carried more weight than the rest. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Nina said, more quietly, "They're not testing the marriage anymore." Adrian's expression didn't change, but his attention sharpened again. "No," he said. "They're testing the structure. And I'm part of that structure." "Yes." The confirmation landed differently this time. Nina nodded once, absorbing it. "Then they're going to come through me. That's the most efficient path." She didn't argue. She didn't react. She simply accepted the logic. "Good," she said. Adrian's gaze held hers, assessing. "That's not concern." "No," Nina replied. "It's clarity." A faint shift passed through his expression, something that wasn't quite approval, but wasn't far from it either. The phone rang again. This time, it was Nina's. Unknown number. She looked at the screen for a second, then answered. There was no greeting on the other end. Just a voice. Male. Calm. Controlled. "You adjusted faster than expected," the voice said. Nina didn't respond immediately. She didn't ask who it was. That would have given too much away. Instead, she said, "You're late." A pause followed, then a quiet chuckle. "Not as much as you think." Adrian was watching her now, his attention fixed. Nina kept her tone even. "If you have something to say it." Another pause, longer this time. "Be careful what you decide to stand next to," the voice said. "Not everything in his world stays contained." Nina's grip on the phone didn't change. "That sounds like advice." "It is." "Then you should know," she said. "I don't take advice from people who don't identify themselves." A brief silence followed. Then the line went dead. Nina lowered the phone slowly. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Adrian stepped closer. "What did he say?" She met his gaze. That this doesn't stay contained. A faint shift passed through his expression, sharper this time. And nothing else? He wanted a reaction, Nina said. He didn't get one. Adrian nodded once. Good. Nina set the phone down on the table, her movements controlled. He knew who I was. Yes. And he chose to call me instead of you. Yes. The implication was clear. Nina crossed her arms again, thinking through it. Then we're past the observation phase. Adrian didn't disagree. We are, he said. The room felt different now. Not quieter, not louder, just more defined, as if the lines had finally been drawn in a way neither of them could ignore. Nina looked at him, steady, certain. Then we stopped waiting. Adrian held her gaze for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Yes, he said, we do. And just like that, the shift became real, not something approaching, not something anticipated, but something already in motion, with both of them standing directly in its path. The shift came faster than either of them had expected, but not in the way people imagined when they thought of escalation. There was no immediate confrontation, no dramatic move that forced a response. Instead, the pressure tightened quietly, turning everyday movement into something measured, deliberate, and slightly off balance. Nina noticed it the next morning when she stepped out of the apartment and saw two unfamiliar men near the entrance of the building. They weren't security. They weren't residents. They didn't try to hide what they were doing, but they didn't engage either. They simply stood there, watching. She didn't stop. She didn't look at them directly. She walked past as if they weren't there. Her pace unchanged, her posture steady, but she registered everything, the way one of them shifted his weight when she passed, the way the other kept his hands still, as if any movement would reveal intention too early. When she stepped into the car, she closed the door calmly, then looked forward instead of back. They're not subtle, she said once the driver pulled away. Adrian didn't turn his head. They're not trying to be. That's a mistake. No, he said, it's a message. Nina let out a quiet breath. Then they're confident. Yes, and they think we won't respond. Adrian glanced at her briefly. They think I won't respond the way they expect. That distinction mattered. The car moved through the city, but Nina's attention stayed behind for a moment, replaying the scene in her head. They weren't there yesterday, she said. No. Then they're accelerating. Yes. Nina leaned back slightly, thinking through the pattern. They made contact. Then they watched. Now they're visible. And next? Adrian asked. She looked at him. They force a situation. A brief silence followed. That's the likely sequence, he said. Nina nodded once. Then we need to decide where that situation happens. Adrian didn't respond immediately. He seemed to consider it, not because the idea was new, but because he was measuring timing. We don't choose the location, he said finally. We choose how prepared we are when it happens. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed. It isn't. The car slowed as it approached their destination, a private office building where Adrian had meetings scheduled. As they stepped out, Nina felt the shift again. Not in the environment, but in the attention. It followed them, subtle but persistent, like a thread that didn't break. Inside, the building was controlled, familiar, but Nina knew now that familiarity didn't mean safety. It just meant predictability. The meeting itself passed without incident. Conversations were structured, controlled, the kind of discussions where every word had already been considered before it was spoken. Nina observed more than she spoke, noting how Adrian navigated each exchange, how he allowed space without giving ground. But even in that controlled environment, the pressure lingered. When they left, the two men were gone. That didn't ease anything. They moved, Nina said as they got back into the car. Yes, not a good sign. No. Nina turned slightly toward him. They're not just watching anymore. No. Then they're setting something up. Adrian's expression remained steady. Yes, the confirmation was immediate. For the first time since this had begun, Nina felt the shift internally. Not fear, not uncertainty, but a sharpening of awareness. The pattern had moved past observation. It had entered execution. Back at the apartment, the atmosphere felt different again. Not because anything had changed physically, but because the expectation had. Nina moved through the space more deliberately now, aware of every detail, every sound, every absence of sound. Adrian stood near the window again, but this time his posture was different. Less observational. More active. "They won't wait long," he said. "No," Nina agreed. "They've already committed." A brief pause followed. Then Adrian turned toward her. "There's something you need to be prepared for." Nina held his gaze. "Go ahead. They may not come directly," he said. "They may force you into a position where you have to choose without time to think." Nina didn't look away. "Then I don't wait to think. That's not always the right move. It is if hesitation is what they're counting on." A faint shift passed through his expression. "That's one way to approach it. It's the only one that fits me," she said. The honesty was clear, and it held. Adrian studied her for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod. "Then stay consistent." "I will." The conversation ended there, not because it was finished, but because there was nothing else to add without stepping into speculation. The phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Nina's. Adrian looked at the screen, then answered. "Yes." A pause. His expression didn't change, but Nina saw the shift in his attention immediately. "Where?" he asked. Another pause. "I'll handle it." He ended the call and looked at her. "That was quick," Nina said. "Yes." "What is it?" Adrian didn't hesitate. "They've made a move." Nina's posture didn't change, but her focus sharpened completely. "Where?" "Parking structure 2 blocks from here," he said. "One of my people." "In trouble?" "Yes." Nina took a small breath. "And this is the situation?" "Yes." A brief silence followed. Then she said, "We go." Adrian looked at her, measuring. "You don't need to be there." "I do," Nina replied. "If this is about pressure, then I need to see how they apply it." Another pause. Then Adrian nodded once. "Fine." They moved quickly after that. No wasted motion, no unnecessary words. The car ride was short, but the tension inside it was different now. Not anticipatory. Active. When they arrived, the structure was quiet, too quiet. Concrete levels stacked in silence. The sound of their footsteps, carrying farther than it should have. Nina followed Adrian without hesitation, her awareness locked onto the space around them. Every shadow, every echo, every movement that didn't belong. They found him on the 2nd level. One of Adrian's men, restrained, not injured, but clearly held in place. 2 others stood nearby, calm, controlled, not aggressive, but not uncertain either. They didn't move when Adrian approached. They didn't speak immediately. That was the point. Nina stepped slightly to the side, taking in the full picture. No rush. No panic. Just positioning. One of the men finally spoke. "We needed your attention." Adrian's voice remained even. "You have it." The man nodded slightly, then glanced at Nina. And hers. Nina didn't react. "That wasn't necessary," Adrian said. "It was efficient," the man replied. A brief silence followed. Then Nina spoke, her tone steady. "You've made your point," she said. "Now say what you actually want." The man looked at her, assessing, not dismissing. "That depends," he said, "on how much you're willing to understand." Nina held his gaze. "Enough to know this doesn't end the way you think it does." Another pause. Then the man smiled slightly, not amused, but acknowledging. "We'll see." And in that moment, the situation shifted from warning to confrontation, not explosive, not chaotic, but controlled in a way that made it far more dangerous. Because now, there was no distance left between them, only decisions. The space in the parking structure held steady after Nina spoke, but the balance had changed. It was no longer a demonstration. It was a negotiation without terms stated yet, and both sides knew that whatever was said next would define how far this would go. Adrian didn't step closer to the restrained man. He didn't rush to intervene. Instead, he remained where he was, his presence controlled, his silence deliberate. "You've made contact," he said. "Now you explain why." The man who had spoken earlier shifted slightly, not intimidated, but attentive. "We needed to see if you would come in person," he said. "And if I hadn't, then we would have adjusted," the man replied. "But this is better." Nina watched him carefully. There was no urgency in his voice, no attempt to provoke. That made him more dangerous, not less. "You're not here to hurt him," she said, nodding toward Adrian's man. "You're here to measure response." The man glanced at her again, this time with more interest. You're learning quickly. I don't have the option not to, Nina replied. A faint pause followed, not tense, but evaluating. Then the man nodded once. Fair. Adrian's voice cut through the moment, steady and precise. You've had your measure. Release him. The man didn't move immediately. Instead, he held Adrian's gaze for a second longer, as if confirming something unseen. Then he gestured subtly, and the restrained man was released without resistance. That, more than anything, confirmed the situation. This wasn't a trap. It was a message. Adrian's man stepped back, regaining his composure quickly. His expression controlled despite what had just happened. He moved toward Adrian, waiting for instruction, but Adrian gave none. Not yet. Nina stepped forward slightly, just enough to close the space without escalating it. You've demonstrated control, she said. Now you decide what that control is for. The man considered her words, then let out a quiet breath. Straight to the point, he said. That's useful. It saves time, Nina replied. Another pause. Then he spoke again, this time addressing Adrian directly. There are people who think your position is no longer stable, he said. They're waiting for confirmation. They won't get it from you, Adrian said. No, the man agreed. They won't. Nina's attention sharpened. Then you're not working against him, she said. The man's gaze returned to her. Not directly. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters right now, he replied. The ambiguity wasn't accidental. Adrian stepped forward then, not aggressively, but with enough presence to reassert control over the space. You've delivered your message, he said. You've made your point. If there's more, you say it now. The man studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. There is, he said. You're not the only one being tested. The words landed with precision. Nina didn't react outwardly, but she felt the shift immediately. Then say it clearly, she said. What exactly are you testing? The man's expression didn't change, but his tone did, just slightly. How far she goes, he said, glancing at Nina. And how far you let her. Silence followed, not empty, not uncertain, defined. Adrian didn't look at Nina. That's not your concern. It becomes our concern if the answer changes anything, the man replied. Nina took a small breath, grounding herself before responding. It doesn't, she said. The man's attention returned to her. You're sure about that? Yes. No hesitation? No, Nina said evenly. Because hesitation is what you're looking for. A faint shift passed through the man's expression, something close to acknowledgement. That's one way to see it. It's the correct one, she replied. Another pause. Then the man nodded once, as if a decision had been confirmed. Then we're done here, he said. Just like that. No escalation. No confrontation. Resolution. He gestured again, and the other man beside him stepped back. No one rushed. No one forced movement. They simply turned and walked away, their pace steady, their exit as controlled as their arrival. The structure fell quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. It was heavier now, carrying the weight of what had just been established. Adrian's man stepped forward immediately. Sir, it's fine, Adrian said, cutting him off. Go back. The man hesitated, then nodded and moved quickly toward the exit. Nina watched him leave, then turned back to Adrian. That wasn't about intimidation, she said. No, Adrian replied. It wasn't. It was confirmation. Yes, she exhaled slowly. Then they have what they need. Adrian looked at her. So do we. The implication settled between them. They walked back toward the car without urgency, but without pause either. The structure remained quiet, but Nina knew that didn't mean it was empty. It just meant the situation had moved beyond visibility. Once inside the car, the door closed and the outside world disappeared again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nina said, They weren't testing whether I would break. No, Adrian agreed. They were testing whether I understood what breaking looks like. Yes, she nodded once. And whether you would let it happen? Adrian's gaze shifted toward her. I wouldn't. I know, she said. The certainty in her voice didn't feel forced. It wasn't a statement meant to reassure. It was an observation. A brief silence followed. Then Adrian said, "Quieter now. You handled that well." Nina looked out the window for a second, watching the city move past as if nothing had changed. "So did you." "That wasn't the question." She turned back to him. "It wasn't a question." Another pause. Then, for the first time since the cathedral, something in Adrian's expression shifted in a way that wasn't entirely controlled. Not enough to define, not enough to name, but real. The car continued forward, merging back into the rhythm of the city, leaving the structure behind as if it had never existed. But Nina knew better. What had happened there wasn't an isolated moment. It was a line, and both of them had just stepped across it. Neither of them said it out loud. They didn't need to, because from that point forward, there was no version of this that could be undone. This story reminds us that power is never as stable as it appears, and silence in the face of injustice often protects the wrong side. True strength does not come from control or fear, but from the courage to stand firm when it matters most, even when the cost is high. Nina's choice shows that loyalty is not about status or obligation, but about integrity, about refusing to look away when something is wrong. In the end, real justice is rarely loud or celebrated. It is built quietly, through difficult decisions, and through people who choose to act when everyone else chooses to remain still. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.